Hello and welcome to the Grumpy Sound Guy Show. I am your host, Mr. J.R. Everhart from CLP Audio and Staging. I am the Grumpy Sound Guy. This week we are going to talk about getting paid. We're going to talk about as a band. We're going to kind of be in band mode this week, not production mode. As a band, how do we split up the money? Does everybody get an equal cut? If you got crew guys that are working for you, or you got marketing expenses and that sort of thing or whatever, we're going to get into all that. I'm even going to unveil some very basic, fundamental numbers, in our area in the Mid-Atlantic of what your average B band is making. So you don't want to miss a second of today's show. It's going to be a good one, guys. I'll see you in a few minutes. Hey guys, if I can have literally 60 seconds of your time here just to ask you to please subscribe to the channel. It costs absolutely nothing to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you can help us give you more of this content on the free side of the channel. Also, if you're really digging what we're doing here and you're digging the Grumpy Sound Guy content, please consider joining the membership side of the YouTube channel. It costs about $5 a month, so about the price of a Starbucks cup of coffee or whatever. You can become an inner circle supporter of the Grumpy Sound Guy and the content that I'm putting up. We'll get all kinds of really cool one-on-one live chat stuff in there, group chat stuff, all that sort of thing. Plus you'll get content that is posted there that will never become public, so make sure you get over there and check that out. And thank you for supporting everything that I'm doing here with the Grumpy Sound Guy. And welcome back. So, yeah, man, this is kind of a hot button subject because I hear 1,000 different ways of doing this. we're going to explore some of those. We're not going to explore all of it, but we're going to explore some of those things. I'm going to tell you how I've run bands I've been in the past and that sort of thing. I'm going to tell you some stories. I'm going to tell you some stories about some guys that's tried to do X, Y, and Z and it blew up in their face, or it worked really well. I'm going to tell you some scenarios that I've seen play out that I think are not fair, but people agree to it and people are doing it. So that's kind of the gauntlet of what we're going to get into, and then we're going to end the video with me actually giving you the nuts and bolts of about what B bands are making in the Mid-Atlantic. So let's start off with, there's a lot of things to be considered, and a band that is just playing O'Malley's Sports Bar down the street for, $800, is going to be a radically different situation than a band who's doing 120 or 150 shows a year, who have crew members, who have merch expenses, travel expenses, all that kind of stuff. All those things, that's a radically different, setup. And we're going to talk about both. So let's start off with at O'Malley's. So at O'Malley's, you're in a band where everybody's kind of just roadieing their own gear, that sort of thing. Maybe one guy in the band owns all the sound equipment, and that same guy handles most of the online marketing and stuff like that. Maybe he manages and books the band. I know in my world, that's kind of been me most of the time, I was the drummer, I was the production guy, I was the band manager, and I was dealing with whatever crew we had as far as sound guys and stage hands, things like that. Truck maintenance and that sort of stuff. I'm kind of handy with a wrench. I come from a long family of mechanics, so I would also do the service work and stuff on our box truck and that sort of thing. So I was kind of the guy, and that guy should always make more money than everyone else in the band. Now, the way I handled that was I would take a certain amount of money off the top of every gig just to cover fuel and vehicle maintenance and stuff like that. It would depend on how much the gig was paying as to how much I would take off the top. If it was a good corporate paying gig, say we're making $3,000-4,000, and we had plenty of those. I might take $200, $300 off the top of that gig. But then if we're playing, at a happening rock club down the street that you can only get 500 people in, and you're making $1,500 or $1,800, I may only take $50 off the top of that gig or something like that. I tried to be super sensitive to how much each member of the band was making and kind of work around that. So I kind of like reverse engineered the budget. I know what my guys expect to make, and I always try to hit that mark. I still do to this day with J3, the band that I'm in now. I try to make sure that those guys are making X amount of dollars because I know that's what they want to make. I know that's their comfortable space. I know that's what keeps them happy. And then anything over that, then I typically put toward, in my band, I'm providing production. So I put that toward what we would pay for production. I'm usually paying, if we're doing an electric show, I mix the acoustic show from behind the drums. But on an electric show, I always bring in a sound engineer because there's two different price ranges for that. I always bring in a sound engineer buddy and pay him, whatever it is I have to pay him to make him happy. And then whatever's left over is kind of, I take on top of my cut. I try to make the same amount as everyone else in the band, and then usually another 10 or 15% above that if I can. Those numbers will vary from the small gigs to the big gigs, like I just told you. So that's kind of where most bands are. That's where most middle market bands are, cover bands, okay? I'm not talking about original bands because that's a whole different scenario. Original bands are on the road basically living off of merch money, so that's a different thing. So now let's move up the ladder to a upper B, low A rated band that's playing mostly A rated rooms. They're doing 20 corporate events a year, whether it's weddings or it's Christmas parties, corporate Christmas parties or things like that. They may have two guys working for them, a sound guy and a stagehand, and then obviously the sound guy is kind of doubling, helping push gear in and out of the club and helping set things up. In those scenarios, your crew guys are usually wearing several hats. Like the stagehand may be stagehand, stage manager, drum tech, something like that. He may be backline tech. He may be responsible for all the backline. And then the sound guy is just responsible for getting sound up and getting all that wired and getting all that going in the direction it's supposed to be going. In that scenario, you have more overhead, obviously. And that sound guy, if he is getting to the club 3 hours before the band is basically just walking in, playing, and leaving. They're not moving any gear. They're not touching any gear. So now in that scenario, that production guy and his stagehand are going to make a significant more amount of money than the guy that's just kind of doing a walk-in down at O'Malley's, or something like that. So in that scenario, the percentages change. Those bands are typically using an agent, and those agents are going to shave 10% off the top of the gig in commission. So there's that, sometimes 15, depending on who the agent is and what kind of agreement you have with the agent, because those all vary. And then, each person in the band is, again, expected to make a certain amount of money, and then what's left over goes to production costs and goes to merch. I seen somebody online the other day talking about just across the board taking 20% off the top of the gig to cover vehicle maintenance, to buy a truck, and to cover merch. Honestly, in my personal opinion, if you're doing merch correctly, merch can finance a lot of that stuff. You put seed money into merch to buy the initial, lot of shirts and coffee mugs or hats or thongs, whatever it is that you're selling at your merch table. Most of the time it's t-shirts and stuff like that. You should be making, at least if you're paying, $8 for a t-shirt, you should be selling that t-shirt for $20. You know, that's just where it needs to be. The problem that I see in that scenario is a lot of bands want to give all their buddies free merch. And honestly, a lot of your buddies kind of expect that. And I think that's disrespectful to the band you're supporting. Like, you know, if I'm just a friend of someone in a band and I go to their gig and I want a t-shirt, I go buy a t-shirt, you know? And I got a lot more clout than what most people do, because I've usually most bands owe me a favor in one way or another, you know, because I'm a real stickler for investing in the people that you want to invest in, that you want to invest in you, you know? So, you know, typically someone will just hand me a shirt or something. And if that happens, that's fine. I'll take it with gratefulness and all that. Most of the time I just buy a shirt, you know, or that sort of thing. Because if I'm truly supporting the band, then I'm supporting them with my billfold as much as I am with my attendance, you know? It's just kind of the way it is. So, you know, a lot of guys don't make money off of merch because they're too busy giving merch away, you know, when they really should be sticklers in making people, their friends and stuff, pay for merch. If you're doing that, well, then you should be turning a profit on that. So the profit on that merch should be the seed money to replenish your supplies, and you have a measurable profit there. That measurable profit should go to covering things like buying a truck, you know, doing vehicle maintenance, you know, that sort of thing, or even system maintenance if you're carrying a sound system around, you know, and that sort of thing. So yeah, if you're doing merch right, that's how it works. So many times it's just not the way it works. You know, guys just they're giving away stuff and they're just not getting things where they need to be. I mean, if you go to any national concert, you're going to pay $40 for a t-shirt. So, I mean, to support your local band and pay $20 or even $25 for a t-shirt, I think that's reasonable in today's culture. I mean, it's not, you know, $7.99 at Walmart that you would get a t-shirt from that was made in China, you know, somebody who made a nickel a day or something. But you're supporting the band, man. You know, the band uses that money to keep the band rolling, to keep the band financed and secured. So I say all that to say, if you're doing merch right, merch is self-sufficient. Merch is, you know, taking care of itself, and it's producing a profit margin you can use to offset some of those other band expenses. But I digress. So yeah, so that band, their production people are going to make a bunch more money. Those bands are typically making over the 3K, you know, mark consistently, you know, and I think all of us can probably count those bands on one hand in our area, in their market, because there's just not a lot of room for those upper echelon A bands. That, or you have, like, I know one band that had a guy who owned a construction company that was the guitar player in the band, and he had a boatload of money. You know, I know another band where the guitar player was a lawyer and his wife was a singer, and she was a nurse practitioner and had a couple urgent care clinics. They were not hurting for money. They just paid crew out of their pocket. This was their hobby. This is what they did. And, you know, because of that, they didn't have a problem in, you know, just paying the money out of their pocket. I have some clients that hire me regularly that fall into that category. They're bands that don't draw big numbers, but they're bands that have really solid day jobs, and they want to invest in their band and make their band the best it can be when they play out twice a month. So they hire someone like me who is reputable and has a resume 6 miles long to come out and help them do what they do the best that they can possibly do it. And they're not making any band. They're usually paying me about what the bar is paying the band. But they're not in it for the money. They're in it for the glory. They're in it to invite all their office buddies out to see them. They're ghetto superstars is what I always call them. You know, they have their friends and their family out. They don't play out very often. They're, you know, 2 or 3 times a month at the most. Some of those bands play out 3, 4 times a quarter every 4 months. They may only do like a gig a month or something or whatever. So it's a different scenario with that stuff, you know. Now, moving right along, I know other bands who was started by, you know, a guitar player, and this is his band, and he has hired people along the way and paid them flat rates. So what that means is, if that guy was to call me and needed a drummer and said, "Hey, dude, you know, I'm looking for a drummer. The gig pays, you know, $250 a night, every night. It's consistent. You never make any more, never make any less. And I will handle everything else. You know, I will handle all the insurance liabilities and all the infrastructural stuff, gear, you know, transportation, hotels, everything else that needs to be taken care of, I will handle. But you'll work for a flat rate. And maybe that's 200 a night, maybe it's 150. It depends on what level of band you're dealing with. I know some guys that are making 350 a night. But in that scenario, and here's where it kind of stings a little bit, in that scenario, there's going to be gigs where the band's going to really cash in $4,000 or $5,000 gigs, and that guy's going to walk away and make a whole bunch of money. Maybe that's consistently where the band's at, and the guy's walking away with a whole bunch of money. Look, I'm not taking anything away from the guy that needs the money to run, you know, production, marketing, you know, liability insurance, all the things. You know what I'm saying? I've been that guy. I know what that stuff costs, and it is taxing on your time outside the band. You know, I can remember, blowing, you know, 20, 30 hours a week easy just running a mid-level classic rock band, you know, a mid-B, upper B, you know, classic rock band. And, you know, I was the guy that went and chased down the Budweiser sponsorship, Monster Energy drink sponsorships. You know, I sold the band, I booked the band, you know, all that stuff. So, you know, in that scenario, maybe the guy maybe it's fair when he can really cash in, you know. If you're okay with that flat rate, well, then don't complain if you find out that, you know, the guy that runs the band, you know, it made $2,000 on last night's gig. Yeah, but you don't know all the times where he may have lost his ass, where he paid you out of his own pocket because the gig just was not that lucrative. Now, obviously, them kind of guys ain't trying to take, you know, gigs that don't pay. You know, they're trying to take gigs that pay. They're trying to take gigs that are going to get them in that profit margin area. But, you know, every now and then you kind of get your ass handed to you. Excuse me. It happens to the best of us. It honestly does. You know, where you're doing everything you can do. You're putting your best foot forward, but you just can't seem to, you know, turn a profit that day. And that's where the band manager or the band representative, you know, is really taking it on the chin, and he's not having such a good day. Well, as a flat rate employee of that business, you don't have any of that stress to deal with. So that has value too. You know, it's real easy to sit and say, well, you know, before I get into that, let me just say, I know another band that pays their sound guy an even cut. You know, with the band. The band's already like a 6 or 7 piece band, and then the sound guy gets an even cut, and it's like, man, everybody's kind of just walking away with like $150 a night or something, and you know, that band is very popular, and they really should be. I don't know. I just think the sound guy should be working for a flat rate. That's what I think. Just my opinion. Now, what they do works. Their sound guy's happy, and I'm not mad at them. I'm happy. You know, go do your thing, man. You know, in my world, I don't operate that way. You know, I never want to work for the door. I never want to work for a percentage of ticket sales. I never want to work for anything that has any risk involved in it, because I am not in a position to assume any risk with this stuff. I'm just not. You know, that's what the band does. The band and the bar owner, they're the ones that assume the risk, you know, whether people show up or people don't show up. I'm a hired gun. I'm no different than the Blue John guy you hire at your day festival that comes out and brings Blue Johns. I mean, do you not pay him if no one shows up at the gig? Or the caterers or the tent guys, the tent rental guys, do you not pay them if no one shows up? I'm no different than them. No part of this do I assume any risk. My contracts state that very clearly. You know, so from that perspective, I am always going to be a guy that's going to be happier with a flat rate than what I am by having things move around. Now, I have worked for bands as a production manager, you know, sound engineer, where I worked for a flat rate except for corporate stuff. And with corporate stuff, they would throw me a couple extra $100 because they're making a lot more money. There's a higher level of accountability on corporate gigs. And you usually got to be there at like, you know, 10 in the morning so you can be set up, sound checked, and out of the way by like 1 o'clock so that they can do dinner and whatever is going on with the convention or whatever, the wedding, whatever is going on in that corporate scenario. And then the band doesn't actually even go on stage until sometimes 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. So that's a long day. So you need to be making more money in that scenario anyways, you know. So yeah, so I mean, if that's what works for your band and you give the sound guy an even cut with the rest of the band, hey man, go at it. You know, it is what it is. But, you know, I see guys who will just across the board say 60% is going to go to the band, 20% to the crew, and 20% to merch or equipment maintenance. If that works for you, great. But I don't think this is a black and white scenario. You know, when you're in a band and you're working for a band, I don't think there's just so many variables to this that can change that are completely out of your control. They just are, you know. So, you know, it's really hard to set and say, is this number right for a gig that pays half of what last week's gig paid? You know, when you go by percentages, you know, sometimes that doesn't work when you got guys in the band that are expecting to make a certain amount of money. You know, like I know a whole bunch of bands that have players that if they ain't making at least $200 or $250 a night, they're not going to show up to the gig. So if you're paying your band out of that 60% off the top and they're walking away with $150, they're not going to be happy and they're not going to tolerate that too many times. Now, if you tell them that's the case going into it and they agree to that, or it's it's a benefit or it's something, some cause that the band is getting behind and that the band, you know, really thinks is, you know, super important and it's something they want to support, yeah, it's a different scenario altogether. But as a rule, you know, professional level players are not going to play for less than, you know, $250 a night. Most of them are closer to $300 that I know of in the middle market. Okay, in the middle market. Now there's a whole bunch of solo acoustic guys that are doing better than that because they're the only guy in the band, you know, or they're an acoustic duo. There's just only two of them, so you know they're able to do more, you know, with the money in that scenario because there's less people. J3 is a 3-piece band. You know, so we can charge very competitive rates and still walk away with the kind of money that we feel like we deserve to make. I like to think we're in the infant stages of the growth of that band, and we're only going to grow from here because I am definitely investing in that band from a production standpoint because I'm not making near as much money in production in that band as what I should be making. But it's really a hobby kind of thing for me, and I like to do it. And I own a production company, so it's going to be whatever I want it to be. So there's that, you know. I hope all that stuff kind of makes sense to you. You know, I mean, the best way to handle this is to really just sit down with your guys and just gauge everyone's expectations when you start the band. Like, where are we at? You know, where do we want to be? What kind of money do you feel like you need to make? Are you in this for the money? Are you just in this to have fun and to, you know, make the most of the opportunity in front of your buddies from work and your family and your friends from the neighborhood? Do you only want to do, you know, big outdoor day festivals in the summertime and then just kind of write music and record music over the winter? You know, are you a club band? Are you not a club band? You know, I know a bunch of country bands like that, you know, that they just really, they do very minimal club stuff and just do outdoor festival stuff in the summertime. And that's kind of their thing. They may do some holiday stuff or some bigger corporate stuff here or there, but dude, it's not where they are. So everybody's in a different position. So to set and paint this budget thing with a broad brushstroke is just crazy talk. You know what I'm saying? It is. There's 50 shades of gray in the middle of all this stuff that changes those numbers from week to week and that sort of thing. So let's talk about what bands are getting paid. In the Mid-Atlantic, I think the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and obviously the further west you get from those two cities, the difference the numbers are. In our area, I live about 90 minutes from Baltimore and D.C. over the mountain is how we say it. So there's local prices here at home in West Virginia, Virginia and Maryland, that's over the mountain on the west side of the mountain. And then there's the over the mountain prices on the east side of the mountain all the way to the ocean. That is a different set of numbers because it's a different economic climate there. And yeah, so these are basic city numbers, okay? These are numbers that will work in most of the B-level clubs in those two cities. Most bands are making somewhere between $800 and $1,500. Now, the problem with the city, see, like all the bands out here in the country where I live at, they all, man, they can't wait to get to the city. They want to go to the city. They want to play in the city. What they don't understand is in the city, there's way, way more competition. You know, so there's a lot of bands that live, 5 minutes from the venue and can play for $800, $700 or whatever, and they're a three-piece band, kill it, because there's some really good players in the city. You better have your man pants on when you go to the city. And you can't compete with that. You can't come from 90 minutes away and bring a four-piece or a five-piece band down there and think that you're going to even start out at $1,000, $1,200. I mean, maybe some of those venues, if the owner has heard of your band and you got some clout going for you, maybe you can get in for those kind of prices. But, I know bands out here that are killing all up and down the I-81 corridor on the west side of the mountain from like Chambersburg, Pennsylvania down to Harrisonburg, Virginia, which covers about a 150-mile radius up and down I-81. I know those bands that are playing the animal circuit heavy and playing all the A rooms in that area, and they're making $2,500 a night, $2,000 a night, stuff like that. And then those bands come to me, and they're like, man, we'd love to break into the city. And I'm like, okay, but are you ready to go down and play for $900? I had one band that is a six-piece dance band. And those cats wanted ask me this question, and they're like, man, we can't go down there for even $1,000, $1,200. And I'm like, well, the deal is none of them people know who you are. Like, you're a big fish in a small pond out west here, but down there, that pond is much, much bigger, and there's 50 other bands that are just as good as you, doing what you do, maybe doing it better, and are working for $1,000, $1,200 a night consistently. Maybe doing 120 shows a year for $1,000 a night. So it's really relative as to, where your band is and the kind of numbers you can put up. It's all about butts and seats. It ain't even about like how good of a band you are anymore. And I think that's the saddest thing about the music business, especially the cover band business. When I came up in this business, there were no A, B, and C bands. Everybody was A bands. Everybody was trying to be better than the guy down the street. Everybody was trying to put on a better show than the guy down the street. Everybody was on board with that attitude. Everybody was trying to give 150% at every single gig, even if there was no one there. And that's just not the lackadaisy climate that we're in now in the cover scene. It doesn't work that way. So that's where the A, B, and C ratings started at, because bar owners and agents needed a system in which they can separate C bands from A bands, and B bands from A bands, and C bands from B bands, so that when you're communicating, and it became the same rating system for the clubs. Some clubs are C little dive bars down the street that you can get 75 people in. Some clubs are B bands that you can get 200 or 300 people in. It's actually a decent place. It's just a small place or medium-sized room. And then you got A rooms that are 500 to 1,000 people, that are some of the most popular rooms in the area that have somewhat of a built-in crowd. All those different rooms are going to pay different stuff, but even in the A rooms, they're not paying every band every weekend $3,500 and $4,000. Those are A band pricing. They bring those bands in once every 5 or 6 weeks, 7 weeks. The rest of the bands on their schedule are probably in the neighborhood of $1,200 to $1,800. Because they only book upper B or A bands in those A rooms. Maybe in the summertime when it's super slow, they may give a C band an opportunity to come in, and maybe that C band will bring all their office friends and friends from the neighborhood and family, and they'll put some people into place on a night that the bar wouldn't have anybody there anyways. They have no risk to assume in that scenario. And it gives that band a chance to be on an A stage and to see what this world is like and how it operates, what it's like to deal with a real professional sound engineer, and stuff like that. So you may see some of that, but even that doesn't happen much. So yeah, that's kind of where most bands are. They're in that, $700-800 to $1,500-1,800 range, depending on how many butts they can put in seats. A bands, like legit A bands, typically start at $2,500 or $3,000 and can go up to $6,000-8,000. I think the handful of A bands I'm thinking of off the top of my head right now are probably making between $3,000 and $4,000 consistently at every place they play. Now, maybe not every place they play, maybe in the hot spots, because I do know that those bands will take midweek gigs for less money, like maybe $2,500 or something, to get out on a Wednesday or a Thursday. If it's in a really hot, populated area, they can get away with that and still put butts in seats to justify those kind of numbers. These are full-time bands. It keeps the band moving, and that sort of thing. Those bands usually spend a lot of time, on the beaches of New York, New Jersey, all the way down to, Myrtle Beach. Some of those bands will do winter stints, residencies at clubs in Key West and in South Florida, that sort of thing. A lot of those bands will fly, which means that they're working for agencies that will book them in, a ski resort in Denver, Colorado. They may book a corporate thing in LA. They may book a 3 or 4 day stint in a hotel or casino in Jamaica, that sort of thing. Those bands will definitely do the traveling, and they're usually working with national or even international booking agencies that can bring that kind of money and bring those kind of gigs to the table. I have seen some of those bands make as much as 12, 15, 20 grand on gigs. I have mixed gigs with, I did a wedding not long ago in Leesburg, and they flew the band in from Salt Lake City, Utah. That had to be a $20,000, band. A 6-piece band, choreographed dance routines. Everybody in the band was on like 11, talent-wise. Everybody in the band sang as good as the guy standing next to them. And they had a lot of eye candy in the band. Everybody was young and hip. Everybody wore tuxedos. It was the whole thing, dude. That's what a corporate A band looks like. And they will learn whatever music you want to play. If the bride wants them to play her favorite song from when she was 8 years old, they will learn it. That's what they do. These are guys that sometimes do winter residencies in Vegas, and in Florida, in Texas, and some of the warmer weather climates, and stuff like that to get through the winter. Some of these players rotate in and out with as supporting hired gun musicians for national tours in the summer months and stuff like that. So those upper echelon A bands are really just built for murder. The depth of musicianship and the musicality of those bands are unmatched. You see those bands in casinos and there's just nothing they can't play. There's nothing that they can't pull off. Everything they play sounds like the record, and they're not tracking everything. They'll have a little bit of tracks here or there. They're like just legitimately good musicians, and they've worked the business, and they deserve to be where they are. It kind of just is what it is, man, So that's why those bands can demand that kind of money, They're usually bigger bands, they're usually anywhere from, 8 to 12, 15-piece bands with horn sections and, all that kind of stuff and everything. But, yeah, I know it sounds insane for a middle market band to make, even $5,000, $6,000 or whatever. But it happens, dude, and there is a whole market for that if you can get your band to that level and you can get the musicianship right and you can get, all that kind of stuff right. My dog is going freaking nuts over here with a squeak toy. So if you hear him chewing on stuff throughout the video, that's my boy Ryder. We just got him. We rescued him the week of Christmas from the local shelter, and we're super happy to have him on the CLP audio team. He is a pit bull mix, and he's 81 pounds of absolute love, and we're very happy to have him. Guys, I hope this information gave you some tools to use and gave you some ways, some trains of thought to be able to reason through this stuff with your guys. Again, like I said, you know, sitting down with your band and just having this conversation, asking the tough questions. And, you know, really honestly, the bands that do best in the music scene are the bands that are comfortable with being honest with themselves. They video their performances, they're critiquing themselves all the time. And if someone in the band isn't cutting it, they're not afraid to go to that person and say, look, here's some things that need to change, or maybe this isn't the band for you. You know, those are the bands that excel and get to where they really want to be. But make sure that if you're calling someone out on their skill set, that you're delivering your skill set 110%, you know? So that's kind of how this works, guys. I'll see you next week.